if you want to add drainage to your pots, do you really want to add rocks to the bottom of them? Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about if it's fact or fiction, and then we're going to give you solutions on how to avoid this right here on the Backyard Gardens podcast. In the past, have you ever used rocks in the bottom of your pots?
What is yes?
Correct, for $200. Do you still use it?
What is no?
So I was diehard about it back in the day.
Oh, really?
And I was super into it. I would put rocks in the bottom, and then I would also take old terracotta pots that were broken and mix them in with the soil as well. Mm-hmm. So I did that too. Now, we're going to tell you how we feel about it, but then we're going to kind of give you ways to avoid needing to do this. So obviously we both don't use it now, and we don't agree with it, and there's specific reasons why. You do, in your house plants, do they all have drainage holes?
No, they all don't. And
I saw you taking an inventory real quick.
Yeah. And the majority of them do, but actually it's really more convenient for houseplants not to, just because, when you're outside, the water's just going to, return to the earth, right?
Yeah.
But inside, it's not really designed that way. Most people don't want the water on their floor. So I do something a little bit different to manage through that for the ones that don't have drainage holes.
So one reason why you'd want to think, you would think you wanted to use rocks is because it'll allow drainage, and then the soil won't stay soggy. And if you keep the soil soggy, it will promote root rot. And so root rot is when, exactly what it says, the roots begin to rot from staying too wet. You'll look at the plant will start withering, and if you've been watering it regularly and it's withering, then that's an indication. You can get your little sniffer down there and sniff it, and you will actually smell rotting smell coming out of it. And if you pull the plant up, you'll see that the roots are no longer that white or light brown healthy root. They'll be like black and small and shriveled and all that. So that kind of tells you that you have root rot, which is why this really seems like a good idea, but physics doesn't allow it to be a good idea. So
I would almost, there's a part of this that you can almost weave in, be conscious or careful of anything you're putting in the bottom of pots, right? So rocks is what's commonly recommended, but you mentioned broken up, like, charts of terracotta pots. I've done some other things, like use some mulch, but I don't want to steal that thunder. So go on.
Yeah. Well, mulch is a little bit different, I think.
It depends, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah. Well, do you want to go ahead and talk about that?
I'm looking at 20 minutes till. I think in all of the cases, at some point, that moisture still needs to be absorbed, right? So whether it just dries naturally amongst the rocks, or if you do have drainage holes, right? So some of the pretty pots, like the terracotta pots, they may have like one little hole that, if you're lucky, is the size of a quarter, sometimes the size of a nickel or something. And so that's just not a large enough hole for that water to come out of, right? So you add something like rocks or something like some type of, I've used straw. I've used wood chip mulch, for your larger pots and putting them in the bottom. And it works until it doesn't, even with the rocks. I don't think the rocks fail 100% of the time, but I do think that it could be a recipe for a failure. And depending on the time of season. So the quick story on the straw mulch, I have a really beautiful decorative green tall pot, probably around 3 feet tall. And I never ever want to put soil in it just because I like to move it around. I don't want to have to lift or push or pull that big of a pot. So I use it as a cover pot. Right. So I put another pot inside of it. Right. And it has one of those itty bitty small holes in the bottom. So the soil the water still needs to drain out of the smaller pot that I actually have my things planted in. So last year I had the bright idea of putting just a bunch of straw in the bottom of it. Right. And so again, this is unique because it stayed outside over the winter, all of the snow, all of the rain. And when I was planting this spring, I pulled out the pot that I actually had planted in. And then when I got to the bottom of the cover pot, I mean, it was just, it started to get moldy. It was soaking and sopping wet, And so luckily, because of that design, it isn't impacting the actual pot that I have the plant in. But it's still not a good design. It's still not a good, kind of good thing to have in your garden, if you will.
No, and that's a huge shout out to buying quality pots. I know it sucks, and I've bought pots that are $300 before. They're obviously for my bonsai, but still, you pay for, you get what you pay for. And I don't use anything without a drainage hole in or out of my house, in the yard. It doesn't matter. It always has drainage holes. So by putting rocks in the bottom of your pot, and this is very technical, and I know about 25% of how to explain it to you. So I'm going to give you exactly what I know. It's about the specific gravity of the bottom of the pot. So as the water comes down, in fact, what it does do is you would think it would drain out because of the pressure of it coming down. It actually raises up and takes longer for it to drain out. So if you have an issue with a plant, and all plants need different watering types, if you have a succulent, or if you have a vegetable, like all these things, but the weight of it coming down through the soil actually slows it down from draining more so than if you had soil all the way down to the bottom. And so then the question becomes, in my mind, why the hell did you buy such a big pot if you don't want to put soil all the way in the bottom of it and let your plant grow? You know what I mean? Like,
I did.
That's my question.
Was that Batavia? Why didn't the hell did you buy?
No. Because I've done the same thing. I've done the exact same thing.
Pot. It's this lime green color. It's a little bit darker than this. And it's beautiful. It's a set of 2. It was discounted at the end of the season. I had been looking at it for a year. I had to have it. Loaded it into my truck, got it home like, oh, shoot. But wait. Who wants to put that much soil in it? One. And again, I would deal with that smaller drainage hole. Right. When I first saw rocks in the bottoms of pots, like what I got from it was your regular soil is going to get kind of thick. And it could clog, even if you do have a drainage hole, it could clog that drainage hole. And the rocks are not supposed to do that. Right. And that's why you're definitely not supposed to mix the soil with the rocks themselves. However, it's and especially depending on, in my mind, I picture like pea gravel almost, like really small rocks. Right. And it still creates kind of this layer where you'll have very little water coming out of that pot, not nearly as much as the water that you're putting into it. And so that's generally why I don't, because once you've done that, no one wants to go back in digging that crap up, so like once you've committed to it, you got the rocks in, you got the dirt in, you got whatever your plant is, if it doesn't work, you're kind of stuck at that point, right? So I generally go without. But I did, again, do it for a lot of years. I do have one other method where I kind of use rocks, which I guess you want me to share as well.
If you'd like to. It's up to you.
Yeah. So I have things like the saucers that come in for pots. I went in and tried to pull this dead leaf off just in case the camera caught it. So the saucer here, I have some outside right now that I have some flowers planted in. And I basically have the rocks sitting on top of the saucer. Right. And then the pot sitting on top of the rocks. Right. So it's not inside of the pot. The rocks are just basically another layer there. And even if the water spills over, again, the way some of those saucers are made, you could still be sitting in water. Right. So that's the reason why I do that.
Are you just using that for drainage?
I'm using that so it won't be a puddle of water inside of that saucer that's holding the pot.
So the added benefit to that is it also creates humidity around your plant.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah. So as it gets warm and it starts to evaporate, it'll create humidity around your plant, which will give it through the foiler, which, inside of your house is really important because our houses are mega dry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I lived in New England, like I would bleed. It would be so dry. So that would makes a huge difference. So that is a benefit of doing that. But, this is a really popular thing on social media to see. This is one of the many garden hacks that are really popular. And I will tell you, I feel comfortable saying, like, there's certain social media accounts and YouTube channels and stuff like that. Like, if you want to learn how to kill a plant, start following them. Because, that is a number one. No, I grew plants for a long time like that. But if I go into, like, why did you buy such a big pot if you didn't want the soil in it? Well, let's talk about that for a second, because the roots grow and you want them to grow and get bigger and feed it. So you're just robbing the plant out of growth is all you're doing if you fill up the bottom of your pot with. And when I say fill up it, some people put a 1/4 inch, some people put 2 inches, 3 inches, whatever. But those roots are going to go wherever the hell they want to go. And if they're contained, then they're going to go down and then they're going to get all mangled up in there. And so when you have to do a repotting or something, you're going to have to pull those rocks out. So drainage holes are always a plus. And get a saucer if you're worried about pouring, you know what I mean? Like, put in a saucer, because I feel like this is a crutch to teach people how not to water their plants.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Because I don't know that I've seen it as kind of like it creates a water reserve, but I've seen a whole bunch of methods for that. So primarily we're talking about vegetable plants, things that you would typically grow outdoors. But one of the differences you have with houseplants, as a natural thing, you over time, sometimes it's years, you may pot up. It's natural, right? And so when you talk about, does this plant have enough room for its roots to do what the roots want to do, then you have recourse for it. When it comes to things you're planting in your garden, after you've gotten past the idea of if you started it from seed and you've potted it up, and then when you plant it, most times it's going to stay in that home. Not necessarily talking about things that may be perennials, but it's going to stay in there for the season. So you definitely want to give it the room that it needs from the beginning. And it's always a struggle, because I always want, as a gardener, to put more in a space, even in containers. And one of the things I've been doing, and once I do it, I have it registered, but I take a picture when I pull up a plant to remember what the roots look like. And I always forget to post it to share, but that's really important. And I'm talking about not necessarily in a container where it may be compressed. I'm talking about, like, if I pull something out of a raised bed or something, that's my reference point. Like, if you let it, this plant will get this big. And I'm always surprised by how small the roots are compared to how big I thought they would have been, So, Anywho.
I can talk about that until the cows come home and put everybody to sleep.
I realized that. That's why I was trying to pull it back after I get out there.
Yeah, I'm not even going to crack that one open, because that's literally a huge part of my life. But if you don't want to talk about eliminating it, let's talk about vegetables. It's knowing how to water. So water heavy and let it dry out. Now as the plant's young and it doesn't have big roots, you have to keep that in mind. But you get into the middle of summer, man, that stuff dries out quick.
Because the plant's getting bigger and bigger.
Dry out fast. Yeah, the plants get bigger. There's more demands. The roots are growing and all that stuff. And it's just like I've said on here a million times, if you have a container garden, you put your container on the ground, it will grow through into the ground and grow more roots that are attached to it.
Yeah.
So,
the obvious thing as far as a solution is, so you want there to be proper drainage, which is kind of relative, right? And I had this experience most recently, and it was, again, this wasn't, it's not like a true pot. It was a bucket, but the idea was a container I was growing in. And when I first started doing things like that, and I first started exploring some years ago, like container gardening, I would drill holes, But I'm talking about like, I don't know, like a 1/4 inch drill bit or something I would use. Like I have, 6 or 8 holes in there, and it's kind of like, okay, yeah, that's what the internet said to do. And so then I'd, struggle with it throughout the season. And long and short of it, I just go larger. I don't know the size. It's probably like 3/4 an inch or something drill bit that I'm using. It's a pretty large size hole, and I'm drilling multiples, right? So this bucket I had, for whatever reason, it was a throwback to one of the ones that had the itty bitty holes. And when I planted it in earlier this year, I just didn't notice it. Maybe I meant to get back to it, but I had soil sitting in the bucket. I had put a seed potato in there, right? And now I realize, I think I mentioned this to you the other day, but now I realize I had 2 buckets next to each other, planted the seed potatoes at the same time. One has come on up. I have, leaves growing beautifully. And the other one I kept on walking past and saying, So finally I said, well, either I didn't plant it, which is quite possible. I've been just watching this bucket with dirt, or it's rotted. Right. And so as I went ahead and dumped it out. Right. Well, let me take a step back. I picked up the bucket by the handle, and it was really heavy. And so that area and our area, we haven't gotten a lot of rain, and I hadn't watered this week. And so it shouldn't have been that heavy. So then I said, okay, all right, fine. So I dumped out the soil. 1, soil wasn't sopping, but it was pretty wet. 2, the seed potato was in there, and it had rotted. 3, as I look at the turned over bucket, I could see the itty bitty holes. No rocks or anything, because again, that's not my jam anymore. But I could see the smaller holes, and I knew exactly.
And they were clogged.
Exactly. So as soon as I dumped that soil out, I still had an inch of soil stuck to the bottom of the container, the bottom of the bucket, because again, those holes are clogged. So, but check this out. Those buckets are sitting on top of rocks. Interesting turn of events. It's sitting on, it's by the fence, and it's just basically like your river rocks, and it's sitting on top of there, which again is ideal. My other point, quickly, for watering, and it changes throughout the season, but when you're watering containers, I try to do this. Don't water the container and everything around it. If you're hand watering, water a bit. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. Go to the next pot that you have. Come back to see if that water is starting to seep out. Right. Because if it started to seep out, that means that generally speaking, that container has been watered throughout, and now that water is basically draining out. If it's not,
so I water
add
deeply.
some more water.
I overwater mine, but then I won't water for days. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things where, and I feel we don't give, a lot of times we don't give plants enough respect. They're not so fragile that if you overwater them one day, or you get, a bunch of rain, that they're just going to drop dead. If you're taking care of them, like, you just don't water them and let them use up the water in the soil, and it's going to be just fine. They'll use up the water and you'll be able to tell. So it's not uncommon, one, for me to water every single day here. And it's not uncommon for me to water once every 2 weeks here in the middle of summer. So like, we just had a week of rain, haven't touched my pots, probably because they got saturated. So I'm going to let them use up all the water, and then I'm going to let them dry up a little bit, and then I'll water them again. And so I know you don't know this, nobody knows this, but I actually grow stuff in colanders. So if you think about that, and that's nothing but drainage. As long as it holds the soil, it's fine. You know what I mean? But there's nothing else in there but soil. And then it's colander, so it all just goes out. The benefit of that is the roots then can get out of it, and then they can grow heavily into the ground. And it also introduces more air into that container.
Yeah, the only thing I caution about when it comes to like overwatering a container, and this is, it's just not one single thing you need to do when you're growing in these conditions, or any really, washing down the nutrients that are in that soil, right? Down and out. So that's why I'm a little bit more conscious, as far as how much water I'm putting in there. You can't control that once it rains. It is what it is. But as an example, June and July have been uber dry here in Chicago. So,
and that is a technique if you feel like you've over fertilized too, is you can do a flush. You can do a flush. So real quick, make drainage holes, use the pot, get the right pot for the right plant, and don't put rocks in there, and be careful what you follow on social media. All right. Our time is up. So everybody take care. Become a patron if you'd like to support us. And by the way, we have a thing going on right now. When we get to us, we have 4 more patrons, and we are going to do an entry. So you could win a one-on-one Zoom call with both Batavia and I. So come join us and get those 2 extra episodes a month. Until then,
see ya.
I about did it.